A mail-order bride was rejected at the depot until a cowboy picked up her trunk and called her wife. The telegraph clicked like a nervous heartbeat while Clara Hensley stood in the furnace glare of Dusty Hollow, Arizona Territory, 1883, palms damp on a crumpled letter. Too plain, too sharp-tongued. Thomas Grayson had written, returning her fare and expectation with cold ink. Heat bent the horizon, dust lifted in sheets, a bell tolled noon, as if announcing her disgrace. Men on the saloon porch watched. The station master built a wall of papers. Someone tittered, tinny and mean. Clara breathed through the sting. The train coughed, steam rattled away, and the platform unpeeled. What remained was heat, emptiness, and a trunk too heavy to lift. 2,000 miles from Philadelphia, she steadied herself. Pride said stand, appetite said faintly, sense said to disappear. She slid the letter under her glove and reached for the handle, just as boot steps struck the boards with measured certainty. A shadow crossed the trunk. Creosote horse iron. Ma'am, a voice said, deep, sun-rough, not unkind. Storm-gray eyes met hers under a sweat-dark hat. He lifted the trunk like grain. Not grief. Name's Ethan Caldwell. The platform tilted. He didn't ask her name. He glanced toward the window. The station master had frozen mid-ink. A few townsmen rose. Play along, he murmured for her alone. Or tell me no, and I set this down. Why? She whispered. Because Thomas Grayson shouldn't be the man to decide your life. The quiet carried too much knowledge. Before she could test it, he turned to the Gawkers and called, clear as a bell. My wife is coming home. Silence snapped in the sun. A woman gasped. The pen blotted. A rider skidded in with a dust-white telegram for Mrs. Grayson and stared at Clara. Ethan settled the trunk on his wagon rail. Jaw unreadable. What happened next will shock you. Dust pressed into Clara Hensley's mouth while the platform held its breath after Ethan Caldwell's claim. She kept the rejection letter folded in her glove, the crease biting her palm. The station master peered over wire spectacles. Teamsters whispered. A woman in calico paused. Sir, Clara said softly, I cannot be what you just said. Ethan rested a hand on the wagon rail. A sun-cracked leather vest and trail dust marked long miles. You don't owe me, he said. That talk was to stop wolves. This depot eats shame. The station master angled his blotter and pretended not to listen. You have a place? Ethan asked. No, she said. A trunk, a small purse, poor prospects. Plain talk, he said. I need a housekeeper. You need a place to stay. The words fell like water in the shade. Housekeeper, she repeated. In Philadelphia, boarding houses hired women for room and wages. That had sounded like a step down when she bought a westbound ticket. Here it sounded like a step up. Silver Creek, he said. My ranch. Not grand, not dying. Cattle. A few horses, a garden that wants more rain than God gives. I pay fair coin and provide a room. You cook, wash, sweep, and set stores to rights. Sundays you choose church or porch. The window slid up, begging your pardon, the station master called. Eager, Mrs. Caldwell was it? I'll need that for my ledger. Ethan didn't turn. You'll write Miss Hensley, he said, even and calm. Engaged for domestic employment at Silver Creek. He met Clara's eyes. Suits, Miss Hensley, she said. Engaged for domestic employment. Pens scratched. Wages, she asked. $25 each month, he said. Bed, board, fuel. A trunk kept dry. Stay through winter, and I add 5 against spring seed. It sounded like survival with corners to grip. Flour, needles, buttons, coffee, she said. And I won't sleep in a shed. You'll have a door that locks, he said. And I'll have a kitchen that stops smelling like last year's beans. If you take the post, we will leave now. If not, I'll carry your trunk wherever you say. Wind lifted grip. She pictured a boarding house by the saloon, thin walls and boots outside all night. She pictured a wagon rolling under a hard sky toward a roof and water. The letter dug into her palm. There was no going back to Philadelphia with pride intact, only forward. "I will take the post," she said. A small smile touched his mouth and vanished. "Ledger settled," he told the window. He lifted the trunk into the wagon and snugged it with a rope. Clara climbed to the seat, steadying her bonnet ribbons. He said, "Sip, roads long and stingy." They rolled from the depot. Town slid past hardware, church, saloon, dressmaker's window. People watched. Clara kept her spine straight. "You from Philadelphia all your life?" Ethan asked, after the last fence gave way to open ground. "A row house near the river," she said. "My father ran a warehouse. After he died, rent swallowed everything." She glanced at his hands. "You? Born to a creek and a sky you can't fold," he said. "Tried St. Louis. More noise than sense." They let quiet work. Wheels hummed. The air smelled of sun-baked earth, and a shy green under dryness. Saguaros stood like sentinels. Beyond them, mountains were layered in blue and purple. The land wasn't empty. It was guarded. "How far?" 3 hours if the mules keep manners," he said. "We'll cross a wash, then cottonwoods. The creek runs most month. When it doesn't, I curse politely and dig." She smiled. "Politely. Few neighbors," he said. "Echoes travel." The wagon dipped through a gully. She braced a hand on the seat. "Anyone besides you?" she asked. "A hand named Miguel Alvarez. Ropes, better than I add. Good eyes for weather. Good with horses. He eats like a man who woke hungry after too many years. Tell him which bin holds flour and he'll respect it." "And women nearby?" she asked, aware of how the town would spin tales if a ranch held only a man, a hand and a woman hired from a depot. "A neighbor's wife brings pies at Easter," he said. "She has opinions about curtains. A preacher rides through when the river behaves. Otherwise, it's work sky, and the occasional letter that misses its mark." The folded sheet warmed against Clara's palm. "Letters that miss their mark wound worse than bullets," she said. He adjusted the reins and said nothing. Hills showed lines of quartz like bones through skin. "Why help me?" she asked. After another mile, "I hired a housekeeper," he said. "That's practical, a beat. And I don't care for men who write one thing and do another after someone has crossed a continent." Her throat tightened. "You heard the word." "Dusty Hollow repeats lines it enjoys," he said. "You won't hear them from me." They spoke of the stove, the well bucket, shelves that needed planing, and a window latch that stuck when the wind swung north. Work arranged itself between them like a small map. Sun slanted. They topped a rise. Cottonwoods traced a thin shine of water, and a low house of peeled logs sat back from the creek under a mulberry still holding green. Fencing looped in rectangles. A small barn leaned honestly and soundly. Chickens moved near a coop. Farther out, cattle nipped sparse grass. "Silver Creek," Ethan said. The place looked lived in and tended. A man came from the barn, dark hair under a straw hat, sleeves rolled, a grin traveling faster than his feet. "Miguel," Ethan called. "This is Miss Hensley. She will keep the house and the peace." Miguel tipped his hat. "Señorita," he said. "Welcome. The stove is a beast only the brave can tame. I'll see what courage looks like in an apron," she said. Ethan carried her trunk up the porch and pushed open a door. The room smelled of soap and clean boards. A table waited under a small window. A braided rug lay neat. In the back, a chamber held a bed frame, a straw tick, a quilt of mismatched squares, and a door with a hook. "You'll sleep here," he said. "If anything lacks, tell me. Supper can be simple while you learn the stove's move." Clara set the letter on the table, untied her bonnet and smoothed the ribbon. Outside, the creek made a low sound. She looked back at Ethan, hat in hand, waiting rather than looming. "I will earn every dollar," she said, "and I will not give gossip a Work and quiet do most of that," he said. "I'll see to the rest." The day's weight loosened. She touched the sill and decided she would plant herbs where morning light soaked the steps. Scrub the pan. Miguel called a beast until it stopped scowling. Mend the curtain, and set jars in order. "Tomorrow," Ethan said, settling his hat. "We make Tonight," she answered. "We make coffee." Across the creek, a coyote called, thin and lonesome. Clara folded the letter into her skirt pocket, not to forget but to file, then opened the cupboard and reached for a tin stamped with a careful Dawn found Clara Hensley awake before the rooster, finger to the window pane, tracing the thin shimmer of Silver Creek as it slipped past cottonwoods. The house breathed cool night air. Ash in the stove kept a slow red under the iron plate. She tied back her sleeves, set water to warm, and faced the cast-iron box as if it were a mule that might kick. The damper stuck. The fire whimpered. Smoke nosed across the room until she coaxed it with split kindling. Miguel had stacked by the door. When the flame caught and held, she let herself breathe and ground coffee by feel, each turn a promise to do better than yesterday. Cornmeal met salt, lard and water in a bowl with a hairline-cracked cup to measure by. Her first Johnny cakes scorched on one edge and sulked pale in the center. She learned the pan's temper lift, settle, listen, until the second batch browned true. By the time sunlight stepped through the east window, a plate of uneven rounds steamed beside a crock of honey, and the kitchen smelled like stubborn hope. Ethan Caldwell crossed the yard with morning on his shoulders, hat in hand, boots quiet as if he refused to startle the day. Miguel Alvarez trailed him with a basket that clicked faintly. Eggs or tools? Clara couldn't tell. Smoke signal made us hurry, Miguel said, tipping his chin toward the pipe. But the air says coffee, so I forgive the warpath. Clara wiped her hands on her apron. The stove and I are establishing terms, she said. Ethan tore a Johnny cake, tasted and nodded once. Terms are improving. He poured 2 tin cups and set one at her elbow, as if it had always been her place. They ate without speeches, the easy quiet that follows Effort Creek humming against stones, a blue jay scolding invisible trespass, cattle flicking flies with resigned philosophy. After breakfast she scoured soot from the lid until the iron admitted a dull sheen, washed the mixing bowl with water warmed on coals, and stood the plates to dry in a line that pleased only her. Large, small, chipped, hole-patterned. Ethan and Miguel hauled salt blocks to the north paddock. Clara swept, shook the rug and found a floorboard that sang underfoot. She hammered the nail down with the heel of a spoon and hid her satisfaction like a coin. At the creek, she knelt with a washboard smoothed by other women's knuckles and worked shirts that smelled of sun, dust and honest labor. Pins clicked between her teeth while she stretched cloth from mulberry to porch post. A kingfisher stitched blue lightning over the water, then vanished into glare. Miguel returned with an empty basket and a grin, traveling ahead of him. The hens are merciful, he said. 8 gifts and 3 insults. Clara accepted the eggs as wages. Do they truly brew? Reach under the matron and you will testify, he replied, solemn and shining. Take a broom for the law and maybe the tall one for authority. Ethan's shadow crossed the threshold. He had heard enough to be amused and not enough to intrude. He set a coil of wire down, drank from the dipper, and met her eyes just long enough to be decent. Garden sits behind the coop, he said. Soil is stubborn, but it yields to people more stubborn. She found the plot where last season's stalks stuck out like shorthand and broke crust until her shoulders warmed. The earth gave bouquet and grit, old roots lifted like secret. She set onion rows, straight as a hymn, scattered lettuce seed, tucked paper-saved beans into cool pockets, and patted them with a tenderness she pretended was practicality. Come along, she murmured. The world is work, but you can grow here. Near noon she braved the henhouse with a basket on one hip and a broom for Parliament. The matron inspected her with a gold eye full of law, then pecked her knuckles for contempt. Clara laughed, actually laughed, at the sting she dreaded, hunting eggs by feel in straw that rustled like gossip. 6 warm as palms went into the basket, 2 from an angle no hand ought to reach, 1 sacrificed to negotiation. Back in the kitchen she set a pot to boil, cracked eggs on the rim, sliced a potato thin, and learned the line between scorched and satisfied. Ethan washed at the basin and leaned a hip against the counter like the house had finally admitted him to its end. You're wearing the stove's brand, he said, nodding at the grey smudge on her cheek. She wiped it with her apron. It started the quarrel. You finished it, he answered simply. Miguel says the fence will live another season if the creek behaves. The garden will try, she said. It would be like a bucket that doesn't weep from spigot to row. Behind the barn, he replied. Handles smooth from a decade of hands. If it splinters you, I'll shave it clean. He ate without complaint, as if gratitude belonged to hands that met the day together. She found she preferred that to speeches. After dishes, she beat a rug over the rail until dust turned sunlight into lake. Miguel pressed a nail pouch on her and asked for counts while he tacked loose shingles. She liked the small order of names and numbers. 1, 2, 4 penny. 1, 2, 6 penny. Hold, pass. By evening, the room held straight lines, shelves wiped, windows freed of old breath, floor swept until pine admitted a shy shine. Beans simmered with a salted rind. Cornbread rose honest, not proud. After supper, Ethan stacked plates for her. Miguel dried, the lamp burned steadily, and crickets soared a thin choir into the wide dark. She slept with the window cracked and woke to grey that smelled like river and ash. 2 cups waited on the porch rail when she stepped out. One was for her, though no one said so. Ethan watched a calf discover grass. They sipped and let the quiet work. We shoe the bay after breakfast, he said at last. If you'll hand nails by size, we'll both keep our finger. I'll name them so I don't err, she said. Short, stout and long, lean. The corner of his mouth bent, there and gone. She faced the stove again, trimming flame like a wick, setting the kettle just off center, so boiling would happen without a tantrum. Bacon hissed like a critic. She turned each strip before it found reason to complain. Miguel came whistling from the yard and traded fence wire for a square of yesterday's cornbread. She wrapped it in cloth with a care that felt unasked and right. The bay blinked at the post, all patience and suspicion. Ethan rasped a hoof clean and called for nails with the same calm he used on weather, cattle and men who raised dust instead of scent. Clara passed each in turn, learned where to stand, when to hush, and when to put a voice in the air for the horse to lean against. You do not spook easily, Miguel observed. I spoke, she said, but my hands hear the news late. Work filled the heat. She scrubbed the big kettle with sand, set beans to soak for tomorrow, and inventoried the pantry with a pencil nub and a paper strip. Flour low, coffee healthy, sugar stingy, soap half, candles nearly on. Cobwebs surrendered to her broom. A nest of twine promised order for vines that hadn't yet believed in themselves. Near noon, a rider from town asked after strays, and let his glance slide past Clara like a chair that wasn't his to use. Heat climbed her neck with a flush that owed nothing to the sun. But Ethan answered civilly, asked after the man's wife, and spoke no title for Clara beyond her work. When hoofbeats faded, she found she'd been holding her breath since the hat brim appeared. You'll have folk asking who you are, Ethan said. Answer what suits you. We'll keep our share of truth to what is yours to tell. Thank you, she said, and felt the words land in a place that had needed them. Wind lifted in late afternoon, salting dust across the yard and teaching the cottonwood a new whisper. The washline danced. The onion row pushed green commas through brown grammar. Clara grinned at the small punctuation and brushed soil smooth around their ankles. Inside, time from a jar labeled in a steady square hand went into stew. She wondered about the woman who had written the word. Not jealous, simply curious about continuities. How a place borrows people, and with luck returns them more themselves. Evening stretched long as cattle shadows. Miguel mended tack on the stoop and hummed a tune from a language she didn't know but trusted. Ethan wrote head counts and water levels in block letters on patient as fence posts. Tomorrow I'll ride south to check the lower gate, he said. Miguel will be here if you need height for hens or long arms for barrels. I am learning to negotiate with both, she answered. He weighed his next words. If this proves a poor bargain, say so. I'll take you back to town, and those who trade in talk can starve. She met his gaze. It was a fair bargain. I needed a door that closes. You needed a stove that behaves. We are getting both. Lamp out, she stood in the kind dark, and let her eyes learn the room's shape without help. The day had been a string of small trials met with patience rather than polish, and the satisfaction it left was steadier than pride. She lay down with the window cracked, creak, speaking in its sleep, garden dreaming under loose soil, and the house smelling like soap instead of smoke. Before rest took her, a thought formed clean at last, the one hovering since she'd stepped onto this porch. Have you ever found strength in an unexpected challenge? She had, and the answer felt like a muscle waking after winter, tender, certain, and ready to work. Moon rose pale over Silver Creek, while the house settled to quiet thuds, and Clara listened for the small sounds she now knew by heart. The creek shouldering stones, the cottonwood leafing whispers, the bay huffing at the post as if talking in its sleep. Ethan's knock came low on the doorframe, not urgent, but shaped by purpose. "Foal down," he said. "Mare's first. She's standing, but the little one can't find his feet." Clara tied her shawl, took the lantern, and followed him into the cool that always lived over water. The barn held a night of its own, warm and sweet with hay, the breath of animals rising like little clouds. The mare stood wide-eyed, sides heaving, damp flanks trembling. At her knees lay a dark, slick parcel of life that kept trying to fold the world into a corner and slide away from it. Ethan stepped in calm, purposeful, and careful. "We help without telling her we run the place," he said. "You rub. I lift when he tries." Miguel was already there, sleeves shoved up, a bucket waiting. "I boiled the rag," he told Clara. "The rope's there if she decides we're telling stories she won't hear." Clara sank to her knees in straw that pricked through her skirt and put a steady hand along the foal's neck. Warmth, thready pulse, a will quivering under skin still learning itself. "Hello," she whispered, not for words so much as rhythm. She rubbed briskly, drying and waking at once, the lantern catching veins like rivers opening. Ethan slid one arm under the foal's chest. "Up means lungs work better," he said. "Up means the world starts." The mare shifted, head dropping until her nose touched Clara's shoulder, a thanks or a warning. It felt like both. "Easy, girl," Clara murmured. "We know he belongs to you." Miguel offered a strip of burlap. "Mouth seeks. Keep him away." The foal's lips made small question marks across Clara's knuckles. Then the rag, then air, then the straw, as if the universe might suddenly turn into nourishment, if he guessed correctly. "We need him on the near side," Ethan said. "Gravity's not a friend yet." He moved like a man who understood how things broke and how they mended. He did not order. He invited the night to cooperate. The mare rolled an eye, then steadied. "Now," he said. Clara slid a hand under the foal's forechest, while Ethan cupped the hind quarters, counting softly. 1, 2, now. They lifted. The little body trembled. Stilt legs splayed like a pup on a polished floor. But he stayed up. "There," Ethan murmured, steady as fence line. "There you go." The mare reached to breathe her child in, velvet lips working against a small ear, as if memorizing it. Clara let her palm rest where life thundered under skin. "He's all heart," she said, surprised at the tears that threatened to make a scene. "Most of us start that way," Ethan answered. "We learn the rest." The foal nosed forward, bumped a knee, found the hide that belonged to him, was confused, then bumped again toward his mother. "She's full," Miguel said. "Low. Let the little one find what's waiting." But the new legs went crooked, and the small body sagged. Clara caught a shoulder. Ethan's hand covered hers, warm, sure, and for a breath their work turned into a single motion stronger than either alone. He showed her how to angle the tiny mouth, how to press the foal's chest with the heel of a hand, to remind it that breath is a choice that must be made again and again. They waited the space of 2 heartbeats. The foal tried. He failed. He tried again. "That's it," Clara breathed. "Be stubborn." She guided. Ethan steadied. Miguel soothed the mare with words that sounded like wind moving in a different country. The latch line on the lantern hummed in a draft. Dust drifted like stars at floor level, while the sky above held the extravagant version. The foal found the teat at last, and latched, a clumsy miracle that made the air itself change shape. The mare's eyes softened enough to set the barn at ease. Clara didn't notice she was smiling until Ethan's hand brushed hers, a light thanks delivered without claim. "We give him a name." Miguel asked, practical as always, but pleased. Not yet, Ethan said. He has to decide to keep it. They loosened the rope that had held the mare safe from turning, checked the navel, rubbed legs until heat woke the joints, and exchanged the kind of glances that happen when people agree to build a single act out of 3 sets of hands. When the foal sagged, they let him sag. When he startled, they steadied him without overpromising. When he swallowed, Clara felt her own throat work as if this tiny life drank for her too. "You're good at this," Ethan said. It wasn't praise flung like a coin. It was an observation made by a man who counted only what the day had really purchased. "You tell the body it can," she said. "It listens to you." He shook his head once. "It listened to you." A moth battered itself against the lantern glass and found the right side of heat, then lifted on unburned wings. The mare shifted, letting her child have every angle he needed. The sharp, sweet smell of colostrum animal promise turned to food, rose and softened into the straw's warm blanket. Clara wanted to cry for no reason she could explain to anyone who had never watched a thing begin. "Hold his chest once more," Ethan said, and when she knelt, his fingertips brushed her wrist. Heat leaped under skin, not foolish, not loud, just a note that said we were here together when it mattered. "There you are," Clara told the foal, which sounded like a prayer if you didn't listen too closely. They freshened straw, checked feet, and watched the stubborn creature test the world again. The lantern haloed dust like slow snow. Night beyond the door was enormous and mild, all starlight and cool breath from the creek. Miguel returned with another bucket and a wedge of cheese wrapped in cloth. "For the attendants," he said. The mother declined. Clara ate because he put the food in her hand, then rinsed her fingers and passed the dipper to Ethan. He drank, wiped his mouth with the back of his wrist, and nodded at the foal, who was making a mess of standing with a winning determination. "He keeps accounts," Ethan said. "He'll pay the world back in miles." "Let him keep some for himself," Clara answered. Their eyes met over the lantern, then slid to the colt with the same small, helpless pride. When the foal finally folded beside his mother and slept like a sailor after hard weather, they doused the light by degrees and opened the door to let night's clean air sweep through. Stars were so many they looked like the desert had grown flowers in the sky for the sake of a single animal's stubborn heart. They walked to the yard without a plan and leaned on the rail where water threw back scattered light. Ethan's sleeve brushed Clara. Neither apologized, neither stepped away. Work had made a small country of them for an hour, and it felt honest to keep it. "You moved like you'd done that 100 times, he said. "I moved like you told me how," she answered. He considered, then gave her a sideways smile. The dark almost hid. "Takes a kind of bravery to listen hard and keep your hands steady." She watched the river pick its way between stones as if choosing kindness over speed. "I've had practice at pretending calm," she said. "Tonight I didn't have to pretend." "Good," he said. "Pretense wastes daylight." Miguel left them with a lifted hand and a soft good night. House lamps went dark. The yard belonged to crickets and a slow planet climbing the shoulder of a low hill. Clara set her forearms along the top rail and felt grain press into her skin, a useful kind of pain. "When you said the depot eats shame," she began, "I thought you meant the watch. I see now you meant the hours that follow, when a person must decide whether to live by what was said or by what can be done." Ethan traced a knot with his thumb. "One burns quickly and leaves you hungry. The other takes work and feeds you." She breathed deep. The air had sage in it, and something sweet from the mulberry. "Thank you," she said, "for asking without ordering, for letting the work be ours." "You earned that," he said. "Work respects the hands that meet it." He shifted only enough to keep the wind off her face, a shield offered without drawing attention to itself. The mare snorted in the barn. The foal answered with a tiny squeak that made them both laugh under their breath, the kind of laugh that leaves a place warmer than it found. They spoke of small things then, letting the dark keep larger rooms, whether the onion row would take, how hens choose spite, how a stove decides who leads. Their voices found an easy pace. Trust did not come with a trumpet. It came with shared buckets, swift glances, and a rope tied with the right knot for a nervous mare. When the foal's breathing settled into a sailor's rhythm, Ethan walked her to the porch. At the steps she hesitated, listening again for the creak and the mare's soft moving. "You should sleep," he said. Tomorrow starts before it knows its own name. I will, she said. Thank you for trusting me with him. Thank you for trusting yourself, he answered. That colt needed both. She laughed quietly and was a little amazed. I've carried a trunk, cooked cornbread thin on one side and proud on the other, and argued with a rooster. None of that felt like the new work introduces you to parts you were missing, he said, and tipped his hat in a way that made the gesture less a barrier than a promise to handle distance with care. Inside, the house kept a hush that felt chosen, not empty. Clara loosened her hair and sat on the bed with the lantern low. The shawl smelled of straw and hope. She thought of the foal's first swallow, Ethan's steady hands, and the way their fingers had met without ceremony over muscle that had not existed yesterday. She set her palm against her heart and found it steadier than the day before. She was not simply help. She was a woman learning a place the way one learns a person, by listening to the sounds it makes when it thinks no one hears, by carrying water where it aches with dryness, by standing still and letting it trust you at its pace. Near midnight, a colt squeaked. Only one. Clara stood at the open window and read the sky. The Milky Way stretched like a road she would not walk, but could own by sight. Coyotes kept their distance. The cottonwood wrote in its alphabet, and the creek answered with long, patient sentences. She rested her head against the sill and understood that trust was not a vow given at a depot. It was a ledger built by hours like these. In the morning there would be coffee, a tack room swept cleaner than any church, and a list on the table where Ethan's blocky hand and hers would meet in practical agreement. Tonight, think of a time someone's quiet support changed your path. What did it mean to you? The sun rose clean over Silver Creek. Ethan hitched the mules while Clara tied her bonnet and tucked the penciled list into her glove. Flour, coffee, sugar, soap, nails, lamp oil, salt, seed, twine, a rasp, needles, thread, muslin, and bluing. Miguel handed up jerky and a canteen. Noise eats daylight, Ethan said quietly. Clara nodded. They rolled from cottonwoods into open country where cholla cast long spines over pale dirt. The team knew the ruts, and the wheels hummed a low, practical song. Clara kept one hand on the list and the other steady on the seat, while the road skimmed a wash, climbed a ridge, then leveled toward town. She told herself the whispers would be there, but bread, coffee, and nails weighed more than talk. That was the bargain. Dusty Hollow gathered from the desert, church whitewashed and square, saloon porch crowded, livery yawning dust, blacksmith ringing iron, general store practical and wide beneath a faded sign. Children chased a hoop. A dog slept. Heat lifted yeast from the bakery. Eyes found the wagon before the wheels stopped. Whispers slid in currents. Dippo, trunk, wife. Ethan tied off and lowered Clara with a steady and brief hand. He tipped his hat toward the store, and a bell pricked the air when they entered. Mr. Harper looked up from his ledger, spectacles pushing a valley into his nose. Morning, Caldwell, he said. His glance weighed Clara against rumor. You're... Ethan set the list on the counter. Miss Hensley, he said evenly. Engaged for housework at Silver Creek. Boundaries set like fence posts met firm ground. Harper nodded. Coffee first, he offered, reaching for the scale. Freight raised cost, but I saved 2 sacks from the better mill. He weighed with tidy pride, wrapped sugar into a hard cone, rattled nails into a pail, and talked about the weather, as if it were a stubborn partner he still respected. Clara asked about soap and bleaching, then matched her tone to the room. Needles, 6 and 8, she said. Thread in brown, black, and strong white. Muslin enough for a work skirt. A man leaned on the counter as if the wood owed him weight. Seems the lady likes pins, he drawled. Heard vows on the platform too. Ethan did not turn. Truth is what I said here, he answered. Miss Hensley keeps my house. Clara kept her chin level. And I keep accounts, she said, sliding coins across oak. Mr. Harper's pen resumed its journey, brisk now that definitions had been filed. A curtain stirred near the fabric bolt. A woman in dove gray stepped through with a tape around her neck. If the young lady wants cloth to work hard and hang neatly, light's better in the back, she said. Mrs. Thompson measured without fuss, numbers soft under her breath. Desert travel tightens a waist, she remarked. pinning along a seam. We'll give you room to move and still look like you meant it. She chose sturdy muslin, a braid for the hem, and thread that forgave dust. Pay when you can if the creek behaves, she said, eyes kind but not pitying. Clara swallowed gratitude into something she could carry without spilling. You'll have coin before Sunday, she promised. Back in the front room, the same man lingered near the doorway. Grin thick. Caldwell, he said, loud enough for the shelves to hear. A man ought to declare himself plainly when he calls a woman wife. Ethan turned then, not fast, not slow. Words at the depot were a shield, he said. Truth inside this room is the law. The man's smirk faltered. Miss Harper stacked flour. Clara rested a hand on the sugar cone until her knees remembered themselves. They carried sacks to the wagon in 2 trips, the sun climbing and softening its edge with a thin veil of cloud. At the livery, Ethan bought a rasp and asked after shoes. At the church, a notice named Founder's Day in 3 Sundays. Bunting promised. Pies judged by Mrs. Connolly, famous for disliking sweetness. Children ran past with kites made from old newsprint, making the wind submit to the string. The saloon offered a piano, trying to teach a hymn and how to dance. Clara kept a half step to Ethan's right and breathed like a woman learning altitude rather than excuse. In the milliner's window, a straw hat rested under glass, green ribbon folded like new leaves. Want rose and passed. Ethan saw anyway. After the herd sells, he said. The garden first, she answered. Hats don't feed anyone. They shade eyes that count rows, he replied, and the subject became a pact rather than denial. Mrs. Thompson met them at the door with brown paper squared, string crossed tight, and a small extra folded inside. A length of braid, she said quietly. Pay when it stops feeling like a luxury. Clara tried to refuse, failed at dignity, and chose gratitude instead. You'll have it before Sunday, she said. By the pump, the lazy man reappeared. Miss Hensley, he said, slick as lamp oil. Men who claim loud often listen poor. Clara adjusted her ribbon and answered without heat. Men who watch strangers' choices often neglect their own. He blinked and stepped aside because the wheel would have taken his boots if he had not. Ethan stood with one palm on the rail, a quiet shape that turned the jeer into background. They finished loading flour, coffee, sugar, soap, nails, lamp oil, seed, twine, muslin, needles, thread, a rasp and bluing tucked safe between paper and thought. The road home lifted toward Messrs, wearing the afternoon like a shawl. Wind pressed a cool hand over mesquite and made washboard ruts hum under the wheels. They rode quietly until roofs fell behind a low rise, and only sky traveled with them. Talk spends itself when it runs out of audience, Ethan said finally. Work spends us into better things. Clara watched a jackrabbit sketch a silver line across dust. I was measured, she said, and did not feel small. Maybe because you told the room the truth and left me room to speak. He nodded, a simple acknowledgement rather than a medal. Room is part of wages, he said. Silver Creek flashed between willows, and home unrolled from water outward. Barn open for swallows, porch swept, onion row writing green commas into brown grammar, the mare humming to her colt. They stacked sacks in the pantry where a cool draft kept mischief down. Ethan set the rasp on a shelf. Clara counted needles into a tin and tucked the thread where dust could not bully it. The stove lid chimed when she set the kettle. Steam rose with coffee and faint flour. They carried cups to the rail and let quiet do what it does when people have earned it. The creek talking in low sentences, while swallows stitched evening together. They ate jerky Miguel had tucked beside the seat box, and passed the canteen that tasted like tin and creek. Clouds stacked purple along the far ridge, throwing shadows across gullies like curtains pulled partway shut. A raven drifted the thermals, clever eye considering travelers who were finished yield. Clara touched the muslin parcel and pictured a skirt cut straight, hem braided against fray, thread pulling neat through cloth, while the stove sighed and the colt learned his legs. She thought of Miss Thompson's fingers on a tape, Harper's steady scale, children with kites, and how a man can choose to be a barrier or a shelter. She had seen both in a single street and chosen which to hear. Home answered by being itself, work waiting, water close, and a sky wide enough to hold a day's noise without letting it echo forever. Have you ever faced judgment, but chosen to forge your own path? Lanterns swung from cottonwoods, while Dusty Hollow filled with bunting pies and a fiddle urging boots to move. Clara stepped down in green silk that caught light like water, modest lace steady at her collar and cuffs. Mrs. Thompson's stitches gave courage shape. Music rose, a circle formed, skirts lifted, spurs chimed. Dust turned golden. Eyes followed Clara, curious rather than cruel, waiting to be told what story the night would approve. She met the glances and let them slide away. Ethan asked a question with his hand. She answered by stepping onto packed earth. Lantern glow made the silk a meadow at dusk. Their first turn was quiet confidence, the sort that grows from shared coffee, fence wire, and a foal that learned breath by leaning on two steady palms. When the tune ended, claps patted the air. Miguel reappeared with lemonade and a grin. He bragged about negotiating peace between Mrs. Connolly and Sugar. Clara tasted something like June and laughed. The square stretched into the kind of evening that lets judgment loosen its grip. Harper was awarded a blue ribbon for a pie that respected restraint. The smith declared the chili lawful. The pastor blessed the tables as if gratitude were a crop worth planting. Children streaked between skirts and the sky kept back its stars, waiting for permission. His horse blew hard. He tossed the reins to a boy and cut the square like a blade through cloth. The jaw was familiar before the eyes. Thomas Grayson. The fiddle faltered. Ethan stepped closer without blocking her. Thomas removed his hat with a flourish that felt like a warning. "Mrs. Grayson," he said to the crowd as much as to her, "you were meant for my house, not this carnival pack. We leave at first light." Silence gathered. Mrs. Thompson stood behind Clara, hands still, tape draped like a banner. Clara felt the cool silk at her throat and the strong lace at her wrists. Humiliation that had once ruled her body did not arrive. Calm, "My name is Clara Hensley," she said. "It remains mine." Color rose beneath dust on Thomas's cheekbones. "You advertised for a husband," he said. "You purchased a ticket and accepted the terms. I reconsidered before the vows. You wrote that I was too plain and too sharp-tongued," she answered. "Both have served me well. You have no kin here," he said. "No standing. I won't leave you to charity." Ethan spoke in a tone that carried further than a shout. "She is employed at Silver Creek. Standing is made by standing." Thomas turned a sneer toward him. "You claimed her after my refusal. Decency has rules." Clara stepped half a pace forward, so she stood on her own line. "He offered a wage, and a door that locks," she said. "He lent a word when the depot wanted blood, then returned it when we reached better light. If you plan to lecture on decency, begin by paying for my fare. The trunk you ignored, and the hours your letter fed to onlookers." Mr. Harper cleared his throat by the punch bowl. "Ledger notes Miss Hensley settled her fare with work," he said. "Town declines a second subscription to cruelty." Thomas's mouth flattened. "You believe this rancher will marry you," he said, voice lowering to poison. "You'll be porch talk by winter." Clara almost laughed. "I don't need a ring to be a person," she said. "I don't need your permission to breathe. I came west to make choices. I'm doing that now." A breeze made the lanterns nod. The fiddler raised his bow and waited. The square held its breath. Ethan turned to her. His face wore the same calm he used on weather and skittish animals. But his eyes were steady for her, not for show. He took her hand, not for a dance, then went to one knee on ground that had carried cattle and parades, and could hold vow. "I want you as my wife, Clara, because you make this ranch a home," he said, voice clear. "Because you meet each day like a partner, and leave it better than you found it. I can offer work, water, and years. I can offer respect that does not waver when what. If you want that life with me, I will stand beside you through drought, calving, and every mouth in this town." A child gasped. A chair scraped. Thomas half-stepped, then froze beneath the stillness that met him. Clara's heart banged once and steady. She pulled Ethan up, because truth did not want him lower. "Yes," she said. A beam lay across two posts. "Yes." The breath the town had been saving went out all at once. The fiddle found melody. Miss Thompson brightened. Harper's wife clapped, until the sound turned kindly foolish. Miguel whooped and tried to turn it into a cough for decorum. Thomas stood as if the ground had shifted under his feet. "You are mistaken," he said. "You don't know what you accept." "I know work," Clara said. "I know quite that isn't emptiness. I know a man who keeps his word and lets mine stand beside it. I know gardens begin as dirt that looks hopeless. I know creeks run most months, and when they don't we dig. I know I am not a parcel to be redirected by telegraph." The pastor stepped to the edge of the lantern light. "Grace belongs to those willing to change," he said. "Founders' Day honors people who planted on hard ground." Thomas searched faces and found only weather. He jammed his hat on and reached for reins that weren't there because the boy had walked the horse to water, as boys do when kindness is habit. He swore less loud than he meant, mounted and spurred for the south road without waiting for the tune to end. Lanterns gathered themselves. Ethan's fingers tightened on Clara's just enough to say he was there. People moved in. Mrs. Connolly with a look that mixed grudging admiration and calculations about icing. Harper's wife with a shawl, the smith with a grin. Miguel with 2 cups, and a slice he swore was community property. Someone produced a ring of plain gold from a pouch as if the town itself had kept such things for emergencies of joy. Clara did not take it yet. She wanted the promise first. The thing met day after day, the ring to follow like a marker on a trail already walked. They danced again. If there were steps, she didn't know them. If there were rules, the night forgave. Lanterns swung. The green learned to sway. Lace held firm. The song had come from far away, and somehow belonged here now. When the music stopped, stars came out like an agreement. Later, when congratulations had thinned to appointments for chores and pie pickups, Ethan and Clara stood where the square surrendered to shadow. The air smelled of lamp oil, yeast, dust cooling, and peaches giving up their last argument. "We'll speak to the pastor about a day," he said, always practical. "I'll mend the latch and plane the sticky window. Miguel will fetch neighbors who bake pie that frightens judges." She smiled. "I'll stitch a veil from muslin and courage." "I'll wear green again if the town can bear it." "The town will survive," he said. "It has weathered worse." She looked toward the south road. No relief came. She hadn't been holding to Thomas for some time. Joy arrived instead, the sober kind that volunteers for work. She took Ethan's arm, and they walked to the wagon, while lanterns nodded, and the bell tapped a new hour that for once felt wholly theirs. Morning after Founders' Day broke gently over Silver Creek, and work met joy like old friends sharing bread. Clara laid a muslin bundle on the table, measured panes with a tape, and chalked straight lines until the cloth obeyed her eye. Needles 6 and 8 waited beside the stout thread Mrs. Thompson had tucked into the parcel. She washed window glass with vinegar and warm water, chased streaks until the view held cottonwoods and the creek's bright shoulder, then cut panels and hemmed them with small, even bites. Ethan planned her bedroom door while cedar curls drifted to the floor. He shifted the trunk to the taller wall, set a second hook behind the door, and fitted a latch that offered privacy without noise. Miguel fetched a chair from the loft, sanded, and rubbed it with oil until the pine warmed into honey. They walked the house together, list in hand, deciding what a shared life needed. Shelves wanted bracing. The pantry deserved another bin. A rug could be braided from worn shirts when cold weather asked for longer evening. Clara placed herbs along the steps in her mind. Sage, thyme, mint, where water lingered after rain. Ethan answered with fence priorities, pasture rotation, and the corral gate that snagged a splinter just when cattle chose mischief. Every sentence respected the other. Word traveled faster than a horse. Mrs. Thompson arrived midday with pins, a borrowed veil pattern, and hopeful jokes. Harper's wife sent yeast with instructions scribbled between recipe lines and good wishes. The pastor stopped near dusk, left a small book of readings, then shook Ethan's hand with the glad gravity of a man who honors ceremony for keeping people steady. Clara's dress would be green again, silk pressed, lace repaired where a lantern hook had teased a loop loose. She basted a narrow band to hold the veil, then set the needle aside when the oil lamp turned the kitchen amber. Ethan carried in a crate of jars, found dusty behind the granary, and rinsed in river water, cold enough to numb fingers. "For preserves and pickles," he said. "For our pantry," she answered, and saw the word land well. They ate stew richer for having a map of days beside it. He asked whether she wanted a service under cottonwoods, or at the church. She weighed shade, benches, pies and clouds. Church, she decided. They chose a Saturday 2 weeks out. Simple, after chores, before sunset. Rings would be plain, vows plain too, spoken like weather reports, steady and clear. At dawn he cleared her room willingly. He lifted the trunk as though it held feathers rather than mire. She folded garments, sorted buttons, saved from tired cuffs, and placed the letter that had once ruled her breathing into a small tin at the back of a drawer, kept, bounded. Ethan swept boards with brisk strokes, then stood aside so she could decide the order of things and where memory would live. Town answered like a chorus. On Monday, an older couple from the South Road brought peaches and a tale about a wedding blessed by rain. Wednesday delivered Mrs. Connolly, with tart advice about crust and 2 pans she declared on loan to the enterprise formerly known as a bachelor's kitchen. Thursday, the fellow from the pump held his hat and offered a thin apology that almost looked like growth. Clara accepted because dignity thrives when fed small chance. Harper promised a sack of flour saved from the next freight, and the blacksmith sent word he would straighten the crooked hinge as a gift to quiet. Between visits they talked past ceremony into future. He wanted a windmill when money allowed, and a second cistern so August wouldn't force choices between cattle and cabbages. She pictured a shelf for children who might stop with letters and sums, while fathers traded salt blocks. He intended to plant cottonwoods upstream. She planned a row of hollyhocks along the fence where color could keep company with work. They spoke about winters, not only storms, but the slow patience that keeps food and tempers from thinning. They agreed harvests belong to many hands, even if only 3 are counted daily. Night wrapped the house with crickets sawing at the edges. They stood at the porch rail watching the creek lie to the moon about how still it was. Oil lamps burned low inside. He asked whether she wanted a piano someday. She admitted music had found her through walls, and she'd learned to hum harmony while sweeping. He promised to look for keys that could travel by wagon without turning into silence. She promised to keep her voice ready for when they arrived. Curtains went up on Saturday, white as clean bone against log walls, rocking gently when a breeze crossed the threshold. Light pooled softly, forgave corners and showed work done. Miguel stood in the doorway and nodded once, as if the house had offered an opinion he approved. "Looks like a place where mornings begin with sense," he said, "and where evenings end without quarrel." Ethan added. Clara tied the last knot, satisfied down to her fingertips. On Sunday they walked to church together. No one mistook her name. The pastor preached on steadfastness and the quiet courage of those who cultivate. Afterward, neighbors pressed hands, left envelopes in plain script. Clara requested pickles, bread, beans and anything that traveled well by wagon. She declined speeches, accepted practical help, and promised music if someone could be persuaded to tune the temperamental piano. Back at the ranch, she ironed the silk under a cloth. Ethan shaved a sliver from the window sash until it slid like agreement, tightened bolts on the wagon seat, and checked harness stitching. He chalked a column of small expenses that would arrive dressed as celebration and found room for each, without starving fences. She wrote, sitting on scrap paper that once wrapped nails, set plates to rehearse serving without turning supper into confusion, and tucked towels beside basins, so washing would not become a theater. At dusk, clouds gathered along the mountain and sent a breeze to test the porch. Ethan carried his chair beside hers, the space between occupied by mutual ease. Her hand rested on the rail, his knuckles tapped once in contentment. Silver Creek laid down a long sentence. The sky answered with a gentle paragraph, and crickets supplied punctuation. They spoke of rings, not price but purpose, of vows, spoken plainly, of neighbors who count on examples more than declarations. He said he would carve a sign for the lane so travelers knew kindness waited here. She said she would stitch a runner for the table long enough to catch crumbs from future birthdays. When the lamp was trimmed and curtains drawn, Clara watched the yard take its night shape. Tomorrow they would borrow benches, blanch beans, test pies, and cut greens for garlands that would not wilt under noon. Soon the bell would ring for vows shaped by work rather than ornament. She breathed steadily and gratefully. The future felt like a field ready for planting after rain, dark, promising, full of honest labor, and the harvest patience can grow. It felt right and calm. Ethan found 3 strands of wire, cut clean on the south fence, before noon. The kind of work men do when they plan to return after dark. Tracks angled toward Chaparral. 1 shod horse, 2 barefoot, stride long and sure. He came back with dust on his hat, brim, and a quiet in his face that meant trouble. Rustlers probed the line, he said. We'll watch tonight. Clara felt her stomach tighten, then settle. Tell me what to set, she answered. He listed rope, lantern, coffee, jerky, bread, tin cups, and a bell to clip on the bay's breast. Strap, so the herd would hear home as it moved. Miguel rode in from the west with his grin trimmed short. Fresh sign by the wash, he said. 3 riders. He drank, checked his cinch, and rolled out without ceremony. Ethan inspected hooves, tightened straps, and studied the sky as if reading a letter. Clouds leaned on the ridge, testing their edges. Dusk turned the cottonwoods to ink. Clara set the kettle so flame licked without shouting, banked coals and waited for hoofbeats. When she heard them, she met Ethan at the porch. He swung down with the stiffness long hours put in a man's bones. You should sleep, he said. Sleep arrives when you knock it down, she answered, and poured coffee that smelled like courage. He ate bread and jerky, pocketed a bell, touched her wrist once in thanks, and moved out. Alone, she walked the yard with the lantern hooded. The colt pressed a warm nose to her wrist. The mare stamped, then settled. Wind shifted from south to east, and brought a taste of iron. She saddled the roan carefully, skirts pinned, shawl tight, rifle in the scabbard, not to play hero, to carry sense where it might be needed. Near midnight, Miguel's whistle drifted from the rise. Clara followed at a walk. She found Ethan near the mesquite line, the bay square beneath him. Miguel ghosted along the wash 20 paces out. Across the stones, 3 shapes hunched in the dark. Horses shifting, metal glinting when lightning stitched a far peak. Too near, Ethan said, but pride edged the warning. I brought heat and bread, she whispered, setting the pot on a flat rock. Steam rose like a flag for the faithful. Ethan drank, then passed the cup to Miguel, who took it with a nod and vanished back to his watch. A voice floated from the dark, thin and friendly as a counterfeit coin. Evening, neighbor. We'll take a toll and leave your grass alone. Ethan stepped where his voice would carry. Toll here is paid with rope and work, he said. Help with carving and eat at our table. Steal and you'll leave lighter than you came. Laughter came back. Preacher with spurs. Hooves shifted. The roan tossed his head, feeling the push that lives in men who borrow without asking. Clara slid a hand along his neck and breathed low. The horse listened. Wind hit hard, carrying rain's first seeds. The cottonwood lantern swung. Now Miguel's rope sang. A shadow fell with a curse. Another rider spurred into greasewood. The third turned, saw the wash rising, and chose distance over pride. The trapped one bucked and thrashed. Clara kept the roan planted and the rifle on the gap. The others might try. Ethan stepped in, cut the rope from the man's wrists, and hauled him to his feet. Lightning lit a face younger than bravado. The boy stared at the ground. The storm found its voice. Water braided through the wash, thin then busy. The remaining riders gave up the crossing and fled for higher ground. Ethan, Miguel, and Clara stepped to the rise where mesquite held fast. They watched the herd bunch near cottonwoods, restless but intact. Thunder rolled behind the ridge. Rain slicked Clara's shawl. The roan flinched when light cracked. She closed one hand on the rein and laid the other on his neck, whispering nonsense until his breath matched hers. The captured boy stared toward the road as if wishing himself 10 miles away. Ethan cut the last knot and spoke over the rein. Walk west to the stage road, and higher on, he said. Come again to steal and you'll go home hungry. The boy nodded, mud streaking his cheek. "I'll walk," he said, and did, stumbling into the dark that already smelled like morning. They kept their post until the storm's back broke. Stars returned, scrubbed hard. Coyotes sang far off, where water argued with stone. Ethan sat beside Clara on a flat rock that held the night's saved warmth, and poured the last of the coffee. Bitter now, brave enough. "You should have stayed home," he said, the words shaped like thanks. "Home travels to where it is needed," she answered. He touched the bell in his pocket and smiled at nothing anyone else would see. "You kept that horse from climbing out of his skin. He believed me because you were steady," she said. When gray bled into the east, they rode the line. Posts leaned where water had pushed. Wire sagged where greed had tested it. They worked without spending time. Clara held staples while Ethan pulled wire tight. He steadied a post while she packed earth. Miguel ranged ahead, counting and mending with crisp economy. The colt peered from the barn, blinking at a world washed clean and louder than yesterday. Sun climbed, steam rose, and the fence stood honest again. They rode in with boots heavy and hearts oddly light. The yard smelled of wet earth, mesquite, and the sweet metal of a storm that chose not to stay angry. Inside, Clara set porridge to swell, warmed stew, sliced bread, and opened the peaches again because kindness is a good habit after hard hours. They ate with steam fogging the pain. The oil lamp, unneeded now, stood ready, its glass clean. Miguel rose first. "South Ridge holds," he reported. "If they return tired." He tipped his hat and went to sleep. Clara wrung rain from her shawl and hung it by the door. Ethan brushed a wet curl from her temple with the back of his knuckles, careful as if touching a vow. "We will tell the pastor the date stands," he said. "Let nothing small move it. Let nothing large either," she said, smiling. They spoke about shifting cattle to higher pasture, checking the north gate at dusk, and baking extra bread so the hands who came to help would carry more than thanks. He promised to reset the corner brace and walk the wash again before sundown. Afternoon found them on the porch, boots drying in a tidy line, curtains breathing, creak louder for its recent victory. The desert smelled new, a clean page offered to careful writers. Ethan's hand found Clara's, not to claim, to confirm. Together "Through days like this," she answered, and thought of the boy's muddy face, the horse's fear, the rope's hard song, the patient work that stitched a broken fence, and the coffee that stood watch while they decided who they were. "When have you stood by someone through a storm? What did it teach you?" The church bell rang clean in the dry morning, and Dusty Hollow gathered as if the sounds stitched the town together. Clara smoothed the green silk Mrs. Thompson had pressed at dawn, lace bright at collar and cuffs, and breathed steady behind a muslin veil cut from cloth she once kept for courage. Ethan waited at the rail with the look he wore for serious weather and honest work. Sunlit dust lifted like incense. Children hushed. Mr. Harper shut his ledger as though setting down worry. Miguel stood near the door, hat in hand, grin tucked away out of respect. The pastor opened his book, then closed it again, as if the pages already knew what mattered and could afford silence. Clara took one more breath of lamp oil, lemon soap, and pine, then stepped to the rail and set both hands where vows go to learn their shape. The pastor kept the words short, the kind of life that can carry. He spoke of seasons and labor, of promises that hold when no one claps. Ethan took Clara's hand. "I want you as my wife, Clara, because you make this ranch a home," he said, "not for show, but for memory that steadies storms." "Yes," she answered, "steady. I will meet each day beside you with respect as our ground and kindness as our roof." Rings plain as fence staples found their places, vows settled like posts in wet earth. The pastor smiled. Miguel exhaled. Miss Harper coughed into his hand like a man allergic to tears, and Mrs. Thompson dabbed her eyes, failing to hide pride with the same skill she used on seams. They stepped into the sunlight while Bunting added small waves of approval. Lemonade sweated in cups. A pie split its seam. Miss Thompson adjusted Clara's hem, then hugged her until pins complained. The smith slapped Ethan's shoulder and offered a hinge for any door that stuck. The pastor's wife slipped peppermints into Clara's glove after the noise. Mr. Harper promised to hold a sack of flour against the next freight. A child stared at the veil like a tame cloud and asked if it rained inside. Laughter pushed back what remained of depot gossip and left something warmer in its place. Ethan helped Clara into the wagon with care that felt like language, and the square, satisfied, returned to music and pie. The wagon rolled home with pans clinking and blessings tied to handles. At the lane, Ethan lifted Clara down as if time might learn patience. They crossed the threshold together and found the house changed without moving. Curtains breathing, pantry truthful, quilt ready for new warmth. Supper tasted like bread and quiet. Later, when the lamp fell low, Clara set her ring on the sill and watched moonlight gather around it like water around a stone, then slipped it back on and slept. In the morning, they listed expenses and favors to repay, and the list made them pleased rather than worried, because owing good people is a kind of wealth. Winter behaved like itself, nights long, lists longer. Coffee, well, Clara kept shelves honest, stitched a runner the color of creek water at dusk, and read aloud when wind worried the eaves. Ethan repaired the south brace, felled a dead cottonwood, and gentled the colt toward the saddle. Miguel swore the garden could abide another frost if coaxed with brush and patience, and he was mostly right. On Sundays they sat under the whitewashed ceiling, and learned again that steadiness is a prayer, answered by hands. The sign at the lane gained a second coat of paint. The tack room surrendered to chaos. The stove learned their names and quit sulking at dawn. Spring returned like a letter finally delivered. Rains opened the earth without washing it away. Lettuce wrote soft lines, onions rose, beans learned the twine. The mare foaled without panic, accepting help the way sensible creatures do. One morning the mulberry became a bird parliament so noisy that Clara laughed and carried the sound indoors. A quiet shift in her body arrived too. The midwife from the North Bend visited, asked questions shaped like comfort, nodded, and left a list that turned fear into helpful act. Ethan studied the list like a map to a valley he had always wanted to see, and began building shelves where hope might sit and rest. He planned a borrowed cradle and lined it with cloth that smelled faintly of sun. "We will walk the creek together when days allow," he said, "and sit on the porch when they do not." Clara sewed small shirts with ties like whispers and tucked them into a drawer beside the window latch he had finally taught to behave. Miguel carved a tiny horse for a fist that did not yet know its plans. Neighbors came with advice wrapped as food. Mrs. Connolly surrendered 2 jars of peaches and called it insurance. Mr. Harper brought up bluing and pretended it was a bookkeeping error. Miss Thompson measured nothing and approved everything. Spring of 1884 arrived soft as forgiveness. Cottonwoods leafed bright. The creek held steady. The sky stood watch without meddling. Labor ran one long night that taught Clara many uses for breath, and measured pain's ambition without granting it the deed. Ethan kept water warm, hands clean, eyes level, words few. Dawn brought a cry no bigger than a sparrow and twice as determined. "Daniel," she whispered, and the name fit at once. The midwife smiled the tired smile of someone who trusts beginnings. Miguel rode to town with the news and returned with pie that could not make sense of joy but tried anyway. Days learned new arithmetic, feedings, naps and chores bent to a schedule only Daniel understood. The house walked softly. Clara discovered she could sleep standing and wake smiling. Ethan counted cattle and blessings with the same pencil. Nights were not easy, but they were there. On the porch, under patient stars, they planned weeks while Daniel practiced his fist, with a dedication that promised future skill with reins. They promised not to promise more than daylight could keep, and daylight, pleased, came back again and again. Prosperity arrived the way it prefers, through attention that does not wander. Cattle carried winter well, calves found the gate behaving. The south fence, rebuilt more than once, held with confidence that let Ethan think past tomorrow. The garden traveled from rose to me. Jars lined a shelf like medals earned without speeches. Neighbors traded labor for pie and left with stories that improved with retelling. The well deepened. A windmill waited on the map. The colt learned dignity. Daniel learned dust was miraculous, and water equally so, which balanced the world. The town saw them less and also more. Sundays Daniel slept through hymns as if the organ were his cradle. Mrs. Thompson measured him with eyes already cutting cloth. Mr. Harper produced peppermints for a hand that learned fast where kindness lived. Mrs. Connolly conquered by the small, pledged pastry lessons when teeth arrived. They did not forget lean days, sacks set aside for neighbors, candles stored for windows that told the truth. When the South Wash rose again, Ethan found the cut before dark. Clara boiled coffee, Miguel rode the line, and a boy who had once turned from stealing arrived with 2 men and spare wire. Work sat down with them like kin, and the fence held. Harvest came honestly, corn stood up, beans filled jars, apples rode in from a higher place, and turned into sauce that would make winter kinder. Miguel built a cold frame from the windows the smith had straight. The bay, now steady, carried a neighbor child in a slow circle that turned shyness into pride and then into better chores at home. Evening ran like good ink. Clara read until Daniel slept, then finished the page because words deserve to arrive somewhere. Sometimes they spoke for 3 sentences that guided a week. Sometimes laughter arrived from nowhere and paid for everything. On a quiet night near frost, Clara set her palm over her ring and listened to the creek tell a story they knew by heart. If I could speak to the woman on that depot, she said, I would tell her the road ahead is hard and good, and that plain can mean honest, which is what a life needs. Ethan looked at her like a man who had won by not throwing a punch. I would tell the man on that platform he was right about one thing, he said. You are sharp-tongued when truth requires it, and the ranch learned manners under that voice. They stepped outside under a sky busy with opinions. Cottonwoods are approved in their alphabet. The herd set. The sign at the lane caught moonlight and returned it with interest. Ethan lifted Daniel once, because fathers do, even when children sleep, as if strength learns while the lesson takes root. Clara touched the baby's hair, and remembered Philadelphia only as the place where a train began a better story. Belonging, she decided, is not delivered. It is work done with love until the land writes you into its grammar. The house wore curtains that moved like grass. The pantry told the truth. Silver Creek held its name high, and the family at its heart felt equal to seasons. Inspired by Clara and Ethan's journey from rejection to love, subscribe for more stories of courage and connection, and share this tale to spread the hope.